The desert was an ocean that had forgotten water, rolling dunes like frozen waves, shadows stretched long and brittle, the horizon a mirage of trembling heat. It was early evening when the sky turned the color of old copper, and the sun sat low and bitter, burning the backs of things that had no voice left to cry out. The wind made no sound. It only moved, slow and heavy, dragging grains of dust across stone like fingers over an old wound. Sagebrush trembled as if remembering something. The vultures circled lazily overhead, not in hunger, but in ritual. From the south, a rider approached. He did not hurry. His horse, dun-colored and long in the leg, moved with the resigned gait of something that had walked a long way and knew the road never really ended. Dust clung to every inch of the rider, hat brim crusted white with sweat salt, boots chalked with dried mud, spurs dulled from disuse. His coat, once black, now bore the color of charcoal rubbed raw. A rifle lay tied across the saddle's flank, untouched. The man's hands rested on the horn, gloveless, calloused, unmoving. His face was not yet old, but it had no youth left in it. A long jaw set like stone, cheekbones sharp, eyes hidden beneath the brim. The kind of face that, even in silence, makes men reconsider their questions. He had a name once, several in fact, but none that he wore anymore. In town, they whispered only him, the one that left a trail of silence behind wherever he passed, like a storm that took more than it gave. He wasn't heading anywhere, not really. He moved because stillness had teeth and sleep held faces, because every place behind him had too much of something he didn't want to carry. So he rode. It was only a flicker at first, a smear of white against the rust and bone of the earth. He might have passed it. Many would have. But his horse slowed without command, its ears pricking forward, nostrils flaring with some buried instinct. He dismounted with a grunt, boots sinking slightly into the soft crust of sand that had once been riverbed. The white fabric shifted slightly in the wind. A woman. No, not just a woman. A bride. She lay sprawled like a broken wing, half buried in the arroyo's hollow. The veil tangled around a brittle creosote branch. Dress torn at the hem, crusted with dried blood, one shoe gone. Her arms splayed in a way the body doesn't choose, but her chest moved, shallow, irregular. The desert hadn't finished her yet. The cowboy knelt, slowly. He didn't call out. Words in a place like this felt like trespassing. He looked at her the way a man might look at an animal caught in a trap, pained, unsure whether to help or to end it. Her face was pale beneath dust, lips cracked to the point of bleeding. Her eyes fluttered once, then opened, not fully, just enough to register the shape of a man and the promise of something besides sun and silence. She tried to speak. Nothing came. He took off his hat, not as a sign of reverence, but something quieter. Habit, maybe. Then he eased one arm beneath her knees, the other behind her shoulders, and lifted her like you'd lift something you didn't want the world to see you care about. She weighed almost nothing. Her scent was sweat and sickness and old perfume. He didn't flinch. His horse stood still, ears back, watching. There was no shelter in sight, but he knew the land, knew the dark gash in the rock wall 2 ridges over, a bluff with a hollow carved by time and wind. He mounted with her in his arms, the saddle creaking beneath them, and turned northward. They rode without sound. Her head lolled against his chest. Once she stirred, fingers clutching at the fabric of his coat, like the last movement of a leaf before it lets go. He didn't speak, just rode. The bluff revealed itself like a wound in the earth, jagged, narrow, but deep enough to hold shade. The stone inside was cool, smelling of flint and dry lichen. He laid her down on a patch of smoother ground, used his canteen sparingly. The water ran over her lips. She swallowed once, then twice. She didn't thank him. She couldn't. But her eyes found his. Green, maybe, or gray. Hard to tell in the dim light. They held something, not gratitude, not yet, but awareness. She saw him, not as a savior, just as something real and still alive. He built a small fire from brush and dried dung, letting the smoke drift without urgency, stripped off his coat, and draped it over her. Sat beside the entrance, rifle across his lap, watching the shadows as they crawled up the canyon walls. Night in the desert comes with a suddenness that unsettles. It doesn't dim, it vanishes, and when it does, everything becomes still in a way that has weight. He sat motionless, eyes toward the stars that began to bloom one by one. Behind him she breathed, shallow, steady, still. He didn't sleep. He rarely did. Sleep brought dreams, and dreams made things real again. Far out across the flat, something howled. Long, low mourning. Coyote, maybe, or something older. The cowboy didn't turn his head, just reached for the flask at his hip, took one slow drink, then rested it on the stone beside him. He didn't know her name, didn't want to, not yet, but he knew what it meant to be left for dead, and what it meant to come back. The morning came slow, dragging its golden light across the desert floor like a tired painter smearing color over ash. The bluff, hollowed and dry, held the light at bay for a while longer. Within its stone cradle, time lingered. The cowboy was already standing when the first bird cried out, a sharp, lonely sound that vanished before it finished echoing. He had not slept. His silhouette was long against the canyon wall, broad shoulders unmoving as he looked out over the plain beyond. He didn't check the sky for clouds. Out here, it didn't matter. Rain came when it wanted, or never. Behind him, she stirred. It was not a sudden waking, but the slow return of sensation to a body not yet certain it belonged to the world again. She shifted under the weight of his coat, the fabric heavy across her chest. Her hands moved cautiously, as if unsure whether pain would punish her for trying. When she opened her eyes, they met the cold stone ceiling first, then turned to the dying embers of the fire. Finally, they found him, his back turned, a shadow more than a man, outlined against the day. She tried to sit up. The effort pulled a sound from her, a sharp, breathless gasp. That was when he turned. He walked back toward her without speaking, and when he knelt beside her again, she flinched, not from fear, but from the nearness of something human after too long a silence. His canteen was in his hand. He unscrewed the cap and offered it. She looked at it, then at him. Her lips were scabbed, her face hollowed by thirst and sun. Still, there was something in her eyes that hadn't dried out, something alert, if not trusting. She drank, not greedily, but with care, holding the flask in both hands like something borrowed. When she finished, she set it down gently in the dust between them. He reached for the bandana tied around his neck, soaked it from the canteen, and extended it toward her. She stared at it, then took it, pressing the cool cloth to her mouth. A long silence passed. Her voice came like a wind through brittle grass. "Where am I?" The words surprised even her. He didn't answer, just glanced toward the east, toward the open land that had nearly taken her. She followed his gaze. The desert stretched endlessly. No landmarks, no fences, no trail. Her breath caught in her throat. "I was left," she said, more to herself than to him. Her voice cracked around the word. He said nothing. She looked at him again. His face unreadable, carved with patience rather than compassion. His silence neither kind nor cruel, simply there. "You're not going to ask," she said, her voice low, rasping. He shook his head once. She closed her eyes, pressing the cloth harder against her lips. A tear escaped, just one, and vanished into the corner of her eye without ever reaching her cheek. He stood and turned to the saddlebags. From one, he pulled out a strip of jerky and a crust of bread wrapped in a square of oilcloth. He laid them near her feet. She didn't touch them. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." He nodded once, then sat against the stone wall a few paces away. He pulled a knife from his boot and began slowly shaving curls from a piece of dry mesquite, feeding the fire back to life. Sparks blinked in the pale light like tiny red eyes. Above them, the day grew hotter. Outside, the land hissed beneath the sun. Lizards skittered from shadow to shadow. A hawk circled high and voiceless. By midday, she tried again to sit up. This time, He came to her side and helped, not with softness, but with the firm steadiness of someone who knows bones and how they break. She leaned against the stone wall, breath shallow, her hands rested in her lap, fingers stained from dirt and dried blood. A ring still clung to her finger, thin gold, dull in the light. She turned it slowly, as if trying to remember why it was there. He watched, then looked away. "I walked," she said, voice thin. "I don't know how far, hours, maybe longer. I fell a few times, thought I'd die before I stopped." He didn't respond. He said, she trailed off, eyes closing. He said he'd be right back. Just needed to water the horse, told me to wait in the wagon. I waited. The wind moved through the bluff with a dry breath, rustling her torn dress. She pulled his coat tighter around her, a gesture more modest than cold. After a moment, she looked at him. "You ever been left somewhere like that?" He said nothing, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The fire snapped once between them. She took that as her answer. They spent the rest of the day in near silence. She dozed in fits, the pain in her body anchoring her to consciousness. He checked her once, twice, always wordlessly. When her fever rose in the afternoon, he placed a cool stone beneath her neck and soaked the bandana again. She didn't thank him. He didn't wait for it. By sundown, she ate a piece of bread and held it down. Her eyes looked clearer, less lost. He saddled the horse as the sun slipped behind the ridge. The sky turned violet and blue, the stars just beginning to blink into life. He didn't say where they were going. He simply lifted her again, careful of her ribs, and placed her in the saddle ahead of him. The weight of her against his chest was less than he'd expected, but heavier in some other way he didn't name. She didn't speak as they rode. Neither did he. The horse moved with caution over the rocky terrain, picking its way toward a trail only he seemed to know. Below them, the desert shifted from gold to shadow. The first lights of a distant town blinked like dying candles, still miles off. But there, real. As the wind picked up behind them, she leaned slightly into him. Not from trust, not yet, but from need. And he allowed it. Above them, the stars watched in silence, and the desert kept its secrets one more night. The town appeared at dawn, not as a promise but a warning. Buildings crouched low against the light, their edges softened by dust and memory. There was no welcome here, not even in the smell of chimney smoke or the sleepy rise of a rooster's cry. This was a place where people knew to mind their business and still managed to watch everything. They crossed the dry riverbed that skirted the edge of town, the horses' hooves leaving muffled prints in the pale earth. The sky above was empty, just pale blue, bleeding into the brown of the hills. Wind pushed lazily across the ground, stirring bits of tumbleweed, making signs creak on rusted hinges. She rode in front of him, draped in his coat, the hem of her wedding dress torn and fluttering like a banner behind the saddle. Her veil was gone, left in the canyon without ceremony. Her hair, damp and tangled, clung to her temples. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, blooming into something almost floral in shape. People noticed. Children playing marbles in front of the dry goods store stopped and stared. A man sweeping the porch of the saloon leaned on his broom, jaw clenched. Curtains shifted in upstairs windows. The blacksmith squinted over his anvil, his hammer pausing mid-swing. The cowboy said nothing. His face was unreadable, but not calm. The silence that hung around him had changed. It no longer trailed him like a shadow. It pressed outward, warning. They stopped in front of the livery first. He dismounted, lifted her gently from the saddle, and carried her inside as if she were porcelain wrapped in barbed wire. She didn't protest. Her body still hadn't forgiven her for the desert. An old stable hand named Eldon looked up from mucking a stall. He squinted at the girl, then at the man carrying her. Trouble? The cowboy didn't answer. Just met Eldon's eyes for a second too long. Eldon nodded, backing off without argument. Stall in the back's empty. I'll keep the horse fed. He left the coins without counting them and carried her across the alley to the boarding house. Miss Garnett, a tall widow with sharp eyes and a limp from a railroad fall, opened the door before he knocked. don't usually take couples," she said. "We're not," the woman croaked behind him. Miss Garnett looked her over, dress in tatters, lips cracked, bruise blooming like a storm cloud. Then she looked at him. Her gaze lingered, a beat too long. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "long as you pay, I don't ask." The room was small but clean. A brass bed sat under the window, the frame too narrow for most men. A pitcher of water on the washstand, a porcelain basin stained from years of use, one chair, one lamp, a crucifix above the headboard. He laid her down gently. She looked around like someone dropped in a dream. "You got a name?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He didn't answer, just pulled the shade halfway down and stepped back. "I don't need it," she said, just wondered. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, then closed it behind him. In town, whispers moved faster than dust. "That bride," they said, "she came out of the desert with him. Left for dead," they whispered, "and now she's back. They say she's mute, or mad, or cursed." The sheriff, a gray-eyed man named Collard, watched from behind his office window, the toothpick in his mouth unmoving. He'd heard stories about that man before. Not much, just enough. The way you hear about wolves that leave bones but no blood. He spat the toothpick into a can and stood. The preacher's wife came to the boarding house by noon, carrying broth in a blue porcelain bowl. She didn't speak much, just sat on the bed and watched the girl eat in small, cautious bites. When she reached to smooth the hair from her brow, the girl flinched. "No one's touching you here," the preacher's wife said softly. "Not unless you say so." The girl didn't cry. She nodded once and finished her soup. He returned near sundown, knocked once before entering. She was sitting in the chair, wrapped in a blanket, watching the light slide through the curtains. "I don't want to stay here long," she said. "Not because of you, because of what's coming." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, said nothing. "I told you I was left. I didn't tell you who left me." Still he watched her. "My husband, or supposed to be." She gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Didn't even wait a full night. Took the wagon and left while I slept." She turned to him, eyes clear now. "He'll come looking. Not for me, for the shame, for the story." The man nodded, slow. "You gonna leave me too?" she asked, not like a threat, just a question. He stepped forward, set something gently on the nightstand. Her ring, removed from her hand while she slept, polished now, gleaming softly in the lamplight. She stared at it for a long time, then back at him. He turned to leave. At the door, she spoke. "I don't know your name, but I think you came back from wherever I was headed." He paused, but didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind him. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing through town like a restless hand. The shutters rattled. Somewhere in the saloon, a piano fell silent. The townsfolk had seen storms before, but never one that rode in like a bride with nothing left to lose. The days passed like ash on wind, slow, directionless, but with a weight that lingered long after the flames were gone. She stayed in the room, not because she was afraid, because she needed stillness to return to herself. Her body began to mend, wounds closed, color returned, appetite crept in like a cautious guest. But healing wasn't the same as peace. Some mornings she'd wake and stare at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Some nights she sat by the window until dawn, watching for something she never named. He came every evening, never at the same time and never for long. Sometimes he brought her bread from the bakery, or a packet of herbs from the Mexican woman who lived by the riverbed. Sometimes he brought nothing at all, just the silence he carried like a saddle. They didn't speak much. But the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. Once she asked about his hands, scarred, knotted, shaped by violence and labor. He looked down at them for a long while, then flexed his fingers like he was checking they were still his. He didn't answer, didn't need to. Another evening, he brought a mare with a white blaze on her face, half wild, barely halter broke. He led the animal into the alley behind the boarding house and spent hours brushing it, murmuring low sounds that weren't quite words. She watched from the window above, forehead resting against the pane. The next day she went down and asked to help. At first the horse wouldn't let her near, but he showed her how to stand, still not stiff, open but not reaching. He guided her hand once, brushing the mare's neck. Her fingers trembled as they touched warm, living muscle. "She's afraid," the woman said. He looked at her. The mare stomped once, tail flicking. "Afraid makes her careful," he said quietly. "Careful keeps her alive." The woman nodded, then brushed again. By week's end, she could saddle the horse herself. The town didn't like it, not that they rode together, not that they moved through the streets like dusk and storm cloud, but what they represented. A woman unbroken and a man no one could break. That kind of thing made people itch, made men nervous. Preacher Tomlinson stopped him in the general store. "She's your responsibility now," he said, voice low, eyes sharp. "Folk need to know someone's watching her." The cowboy said nothing, just kept loading salt and coffee into his bag. "God sees what's beneath," the preacher warned. The man's eyes met his then, flat, cool, endless. "So does the desert," the cowboy said. The preacher stepped back. She was in the stables when the blue waistcoat appeared. A man out of place here, clean hands, polished boots, hat too new. He rode a sleek black gelding and dismounted with confidence that came from coin, not character. He walked like someone who thought the ground owed him thanks for each step. The blacksmith saw him first, then the barkeep, then the sheriff. By the time he reached the center of town, everyone knew. He found her near the pump behind the stables, washing dust from her face. She turned at the sound of his steps. Her whole body stiffened, not like fear, like a tree meeting wind. His smile was soft, practiced. "Eleanor?" She said nothing, just wiped her hands dry and folded the towel over the rail. "You're looking well." She glanced at the bruise, still fading beneath her eye, then at his coat, still hanging from her shoulders. Said nothing. He stepped closer. "I came to take you home." She looked at him for a long time, then looked past him, toward the shadow in the alley, where the cowboy leaned against the post of the livery, arms crossed, hat pulled low. "I don't live where I'm not wanted." The man's smile wavered. "You're my wife." She touched the ring still on her finger, slid it off, let it fall into the basin with a soft clink. "No, I was your mistake." His face darkened. "You think this place will keep you? Him? You think this town will protect you?" She didn't answer, but the cowboy stepped forward then, slow and silent. He didn't reach for his gun, didn't say a word, just stood beside her. The man in the waistcoat looked at him, at the line of scars down his hand, at the calm in his shoulders. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He turned and left, boots loud on the wooden boardwalk. That night, they sat by the fire behind the stables. The mare was tied nearby, dozing. She passed him a tin cup of coffee. Their fingers touched for a second, just enough to notice. "I was 13 the first time I was told to stay quiet," she said, "by a father, then by a husband, then by a minister." He looked at her. The fire cracked between them. "You've never asked why I was out there, why he left me." "You didn't leave yourself," he said. She nodded, took a sip. "I think I kept walking because I'd rather die in the desert than live in someone else's silence." He said nothing for a long time, then leaned forward and threw another stick on the fire. Smoke rose in slow coils. "They'll talk," she said. "They already are. And you?" "I don't listen much." She smiled, just a flicker. In the distance, thunder rolled, not close, but coming. In town, windows were latched early, lamps burned low. The sheriff sat alone in his office, a rifle across his lap, a bottle of rye half drained. He didn't know what was coming, only that something was. The preacher didn't sleep that night, nor did the man in the blue waistcoat. He waited in the boarding house down the road, pacing between window and bed, checking the pistol in his satchel. But no storm came, just wind. Soft, constant, full of dust. And somewhere in the dark, a woman sat beside a man who didn't need to speak to be understood. The town awoke under a sky the color of dull iron, low and heavy, with clouds stacked like sorrow, the kind of morning where birds stay quiet and the wind smells of unsettled things. Horses shifted in their stalls, and chickens fussed before laying nothing at all. He was already awake, standing outside the livery, tying down the last of his gear. His horse, calm and silent as its rider, shifted its weight and waited. The saddle was clean, the straps checked twice. He moved with a deliberate stillness, like a man who'd made a decision and had no need to rush. She stepped into the street not long after, her dress mended but still marked by the desert. His coat hung from her shoulders, and her hair was braided down her back in a single line, clean and strong. No veil, no ring, only a satchel slung over one shoulder, and boots that were too big but already dust-worn. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Town watched them gather from windows, porches, behind crates of onions and flour. Children stood behind skirts. Men leaned on posts but didn't call out. Eyes followed them like prayers held too long in the mouth. The sheriff stood at the edge of Main Street, arms folded. His badge had lost its shine, tarnished like everything else out here. He gave a nod, not approval, not warning, just recognition. Trouble's still close, he said. The cowboy's eyes didn't waver. It won't find her where I'm going. Behind them, the man in the blue waistcoat watched from the second-story window of the hotel, his face pale, his jaw set. He had the look of someone holding a hand he no longer believed in. In his lap, the pistol sat untouched. She looked up at him once, just once, long enough to meet his eyes and see the small, sour thing he carried. Not love, not regret, only pride, bruised and bleeding. He turned from the window. She never looked up again. The cowboy swung into the saddle, then reached a hand down. She took it. He pulled her up behind him, not like a rescue, but like a promise. She settled against his back, arms around his waist. The horse stamped once, then moved. They passed the saloon. The piano player paused, one hand resting on a yellowed key. At the post office, the clerk stepped aside from his window, hat held to his chest. At the chapel, the preacher stood in the doorway, eyes narrow, but said nothing. They passed the preacher's wife, who simply placed a folded handkerchief into the woman's palm as they rode by. A small gift, clean and soft, a token for the road. No one followed them. No one stopped them. They left town like smoke leaves fire, slow, without sound, but with meaning. For hours they rode, past the dry creek bed and the grave of the dead cottonwood, past the place where the bones of a long-dead ox bleached in the sun, past everything she'd come through and everything he refused to return to. The wind picked up around noon, not sharp but steady, like breath through a canyon. Her braid loosened in the wind, and strands of hair caught the sun. She leaned into him slightly, not from weakness, but from the quiet strength of choosing not to ride alone. They stopped near dusk in a basin where willows clung to a meager spring. He dismounted first, then helped her down without a word. He gathered wood. She prepared coffee. Their movements were mirrors, unspoken, coordinated, practiced. Not from time, but from recognition. Later, by the fire, she pulled out the handkerchief and unfolded it. Inside was a single button, white with a thin crack running through the center. No note, just that. She stared at it a long time, then folded it again and tucked it away. He watched her without asking. Night fell slow. The fire was small. The stars, endless. She spoke first. I don't know where we're going. He nodded. I don't mind. He turned toward her then, the lines of his face soft in the firelight. You don't need to run any more, he said. She looked out across the dark plain. I'm not. Not now. A long silence followed. Wind moved through the grass. The mare whinnied softly from her tether. Why did you stop? She asked. In the arroyo. His jaw tightened, then loosened, because there was something alive in all that dying. She nodded, slow. They didn't touch, but she moved closer, sat beside him. The fire crackled between them, a thin line of heat against the cold coming down from the hills. She lay down first beneath his coat. He stayed sitting, watching the fire. As sleep took her, her hand found his and rested there, light and certain. he didn't move it away. By morning, they were gone again, leaving no sign but a few ashes and the soft print of boots beside a single, unshod hoofprint. Back in town, the boarding house door was closed, the hotel room empty. The preacher preached of dust and obedience. The sheriff polished his badge. But something had shifted, just slightly, as if silence had learned a new shape. And far across the basin, where the horizon bled into haze, two figures rode beneath a sky just beginning to forget the storm. No one followed, no one dared. And somewhere out there, where maps ended and names meant less than truth, a man without a past and a woman with no more need to explain herself rode side by side into a world that didn't yet know them, but would. Not like a fire, not like a gun, like rain, slow, quiet, certain.